I'm going to do as little preamble as possible today. I've been sent this game, Violets of Amicus, and the creator has said, we had a failed Kickstarter, most of our marketing efforts don't grab eyes. Even after getting new promotional art commissioned, we're unable to capture the Zelda-like market. I want to play the game, I want to look at the Kickstarter, I want to look at all of the marketing, and then think about what they could perhaps do better next time, or what you could do better if you're making a game of this sort. So we've got a top-down Zelda-like game. I'll just give you my kind of absolute first impressions.
I wanted my grandson to follow in my footsteps. To be a courier, like my father. They barely held together.
Stuff I'm seeing so far that I like. I like all of the art. The animations look pretty promising. You're showing us a range of activities. We've got riding a horse, although I don't think riding a horse in a top-down game this zoomed in is going to be super fun in a sort of peril situation. But when I see everything I'm seeing here looks like a kind of good example of what it's doing in terms of the pixel art and animation and stuff like that.
But he told me he always dreamt of it. Valere used to be a peaceful land.
We've got a personal story, voiceover is talking about the main character, a fantasy world where more monsters are appearing each day. That's nothing new, that's nothing that's gonna like really grab us as like a special feature of this game. The other thing that feels a bit strange to me is I don't really associate voiceovers with this kind of period of retro pixel art, because this looks like a SNES game.
My father and his father. But
throwing the slimes at each other is a nice feature. Picking up enemies and using their skills against other enemies, really neat little mechanical hook there. So there's a lot of promising stuff here. We're going to take a look at the gameplay. I'm going to just kind of map my thoughts as we go along. The problem with making a trailer for a game with such a fixed relationship between the camera and the character is it doesn't feel dynamic. And we've got that kind of classic, it's almost like a cliche shot. The character walking through different environments. This bit. That's such a game trailer cliche. It's kind of a way of compensating for the fact that the camera is always in the same place in relation to the character. And you're trying to present something cinematically that isn't really cinematic, because in a film we don't have a camera following the same person around from the same angle all of the time. The pixel art's beautiful, the animation looks good. I think the trailer showcases some unique mechanics that would appeal to people who like this genre. We're going to play it in a minute and get a sense of what the game feels like. Before we do that, I want to set some criteria, like the engagement, or like what it feels like to actually play. So this is going to include things like game feel, onboarding, and the appeal is going to include things like the art style, the general fantasy of it, the character, which is part of the fantasy. I think the thing that really stands out to me as I start looking at this, having not played it yet, is that the character does not appeal to me. This type of game really needs you to get this thing right. And if you think of Link, they have to be likable in a particular way. And I think there are a lot of different ways you can approach that. But this dude feels like a very generic human that has been given dyed hair to try and make him interesting in some way. These are the kind of things I'm going to be thinking about. The general appeal of the game. This is the stuff that reels you in before you've even played it. And this is the stuff to do with, like, okay, once you're playing the demo, is it working for you? Is it going to make me think, oh, I want more of this, I'll back the Kickstarter? I don't really care about the technical side of game development. If something works, it works. But I don't necessarily want to see an apology for something like that. I would rather it just masked it in some way. Tell me what's loading. Give me a progress bar. Just do what a video game would normally do. Where am I? Is this a dream? Whatever is in this cave, I will master it and prove to myself and them that I'm strong enough to become a soldier in Valere. Good intro in the sense that we only got a couple of lines of dialogue story set up there, which is good because in a game like this, I immediately want to get in charge of the character as quickly as I can. I really don't want to get too much story before I get control of the character. Yeah, the face looks a little bit... It's a little bit too big in the eyes in a sort of startled looking way, isn't it? I'm going to press left shift to see a greater distance. I should try that when I'm done thinking. LS? Ah, the left. Ah, okay, I can zoom out. Lots of potential interactions with the objects in the environment. You know, I'm picking stuff up and throwing it. I now feel an urge to pick up every rock in case it's got ore in, but I don't think they're going to have. Ouch! I pinched my hand in the chest slatch. I'm not sure I like teaching the player to heal by hurting them with a chest, because that's not a thing that's going to hurt us again in the game. That feels a bit hackneyed. I'll defeat them like I was born to. I'll lock onto enemies by pressing and holding LT. When throwing rocks, I will throw them in my target's direction. You hear that, Globs? I'm gonna throw a rock right at you. There's something about the tone of this tutorial as well, where it's kind of written in this wink wink nudge nudge way of the character talking about the controls and stuff. And I think that would read a lot better if the character portrait felt a bit more playful. The character portrait looks traumatized. He looks like he's seen some stuff. I don't have a problem with presenting the tutorial this way, but I do think that there's a sort of playfulness in the way that tutorial copy is written that doesn't fit with the kind of traumatized looking character that we're playing. A simple and balanced one-handed weapon. It's average but great for beginners. Okay, I equip stuff with my D-pad. It's like I'm already a soldier. Time to switch my weapon type by pressing the D-pad while food is equipped. My weapon degraded, piece of junk. Something came off it though. I'll keep it in my pocket for now. Maybe wait a little bit later in the game to teach people about weapon degradation. As a fan of these games, you will know that is a controversial mechanic. Kind of comes back to something I say a lot, which is that onboarding of your game isn't just tutorializing the game, but actually hooking people into it and making them understand what's fun about your game. Weapon degradation is like a economy sort of management feature in games to make sure that you make use of crafting and explore everywhere to collect materials and stuff like that. It's not necessarily something you show people straight away when you're trying to hook people into the game. You know, you're not Zelda, you don't have the brand power of Zelda, so have that feature if it works for your game, but don't front load it so much because it's going to just annoy people very early. Would you like me to increase an inventory's capacity using your weapon scraps? You have 1 weapon scrap. Which inventory's capacity would you like me to increase? I'm sure that this is a good feature, having an inventory to expand. I don't think it's an exciting feature to introduce in the first 20 minutes. I hate to talk about user journeys because it's very kind of corporate app dev speak, but you do want to sort of write a user journey of everything that the player is experiencing in the first 10 minutes and then expand it out to half an hour, expand it out to an hour, and think, if I was playing a game, would I be excited to have this at this point in the game? Weapon degradation in the first 10 minutes, not exciting. Upgrading my inventory to hold more items in the first 10 minutes, not exciting. Your onboarding isn't teaching people every part of your game. Your onboarding is teaching people the basics that they need to access whatever is fun in your game, and also inviting them into the world, inviting them into the fantasy, and making them excited about what's to come. The combat we've done feels good. Picking stuff up and throwing it feels good. This is a cute little guy running around in a cute little world bashing things, and the weaknesses so far are to do with, you know, thinking about the player journey and just respecting the player a little bit more and respecting what they want to get out of the first half hour of a video game. A key that can be used to unlock a lock. There's some quite clumsy language in this, and I don't know if it's been written in English and translated, but unlock a lock. Open a lock, right? A fungi dropped from a glob in the Arasant province that can be eaten to restore half of a heart. That sentence just has too many things in it. A fungi dropped from a glob in the Arasant province. Full stop. Can be eaten to restore half of a heart. That is how to properly structure what you're trying to say there. Just split it into 2 statements, much clearer. The music choice in this section also is very melancholic, and it's quite pretty music, but it's not getting me hyped up for the sort of situation we're in. A projectile, yeah, okay, I know what an arrow is. Only the best soldiers know archery, and I plan on being the greatest. I would like him to have more than one character trait than just wanting to be a soldier. I'm finding it tedious already. I can maybe get on board with playing as a young lad that wants to be a soldier, but he doesn't really have any qualities about him apart from, I want to be a soldier, I'll show them. It's sort of what happens when you're in the early stages of learning to write and you find out that characters should have motivations, and then you kind of make your characters walk in the room and state their motivations, and then they don't have any other things to say apart from, this is my motivation, this is what I want to do. And, you know, I already said at the start that I don't find the visual design of the character massively appealing. So now I'm kind of finding myself thinking, well, I wish this was a silent protagonist. A lot of stuff has been designed and implemented, and now the game wants to show it off as quickly as possible, as early as possible, and it's just not necessarily an exciting activity. We've had so much of, like, this is how you do this in a menu, this is how you do this in a menu, and that stuff just needs to come way, way later on. Let me kill loads of stuff and collect things and solve some little environmental puzzles and slow down the onboarding of the player into all of these game systems to do with having loads of different weapons and combining them and stuff like that. Slow that down by about 400%. So that I can get a basic enjoyment of being this dude in this situation. Because you're throwing so much at me to be like, look at all these features that exist in this game, and they are not the kind of features that make you excited or interested in the first half hour of the game. The demo feels like it's just trying to teach us way too much, way too quickly, and a lot of that teaching is done in service of, like, showing off the depth of the game that I just don't care about at this stage when I'm playing it, you know? Let's see what this does in the first 5 or 10 minutes.
I'm soaked. I knew sleeping outside was a bad idea.
I can smell something, almost like north of you.
So obviously this is a game that has a lot of kind of IP power because it's Adventure Time. But we got an introduction that is like setting a situation up, why we're in this place and what we're doing here. And the last game we did have a little bit of that. It was like, I'm in this cave to fight stuff because I want to become a soldier. But this is a little bit more immediate of like, I've got to find my buddy. Even if you've never engaged with Adventure Time before, it's going to introduce them as if they're totally new. So we shouldn't just dismiss this as, oh, it's an Adventure Time game, they can do whatever they want, because this is very well thought out in terms of how it's onboarding us into the world. It's treating us as if we've never watched Adventure Time before. And if an Adventure Time game needs to onboard us into its world, then a game by some random IP that no one's ever heard of also needs to do that. We've got a goal of exploring and finding our buddy. The tutorial is sort of happening as you need it in order to help you do the thing you're doing in the story, right? Just think of the relative pace of how mechanics are being introduced here and the context that they're being introduced in. In the previous game, we got a very broad idea that we're in this place to loosely practice being a hero. There's no sense of where I'm going in that dungeon or why I'm going there, so we don't have the justification within the level design of where I'm trying to go or what I'm trying to do. And the mechanics are introduced very, very quickly in quite a jargon-heavy way. This is done much more slowly. There is a lot more character, and the reference to what you're doing with your controller, it's not trying to like upfront all of this complexity and go, look at all this stuff that's in this game, right? Because that is not the fantasy of the main appeal of the game. I think the way that the game felt to play was pretty good. Like, I don't have any issues with the core mechanics of Violets of Amicus and just generally how it feels to interact with. And really, a lot of the problems that we saw were with the onboarding being very poopy. That's my professional term for it. The reason the onboarding was very poopy was because it wasn't focused on making the player feel cool, right? It was focused on showing off deep mechanics that the player doesn't care about in their first hour or even 2 hours of playing the game. Introduce weapon degradation too early, which is going to be controversial with fans of this genre. And that, again, that kind of just feeds back into this broader idea of like, you're not focusing on what is important to a player. So you're treating your onboarding too much as a tutorial for how to play the game and not as like a taster of what is cool about the game and why people should be excited about what they're about to play, right? That's the difference between a tutorial and an onboarding. Onboarding includes your tutorial, how you teach the game, but it also includes all of the stuff you do at the start of the game to make players excited about it. And I felt like that was a tutorial that did not onboard me into the fantasy of the game, and trying to step away from the game and instead of thinking about, you know, how much time you spent on each thing proportionally, thinking about what players actually care about. And they don't care that you've got a unique weapon system if they don't care about the fundamental fantasy. There's a concept that I've only found very recently, which is the idea of a story stack. And this is a really, really cool, helpful thing that every indie developer should know about. The stuff that is at the bottom of this stack is less flexible. Once you've locked it in, you can't move it around, right? So the central fantasy of Red Dead Redemption is being a grizzled cowboy in the Old West. Every game has a central fantasy, which is at the bottom of this story stack. Not every game has a story. Not every game has world building per se. Not every game has an economy, and most games have action. So most games, at the bare minimum, are an action of what you're doing supported by a fantasy. So, right, even in chess, there is a fantasy of being a ruler in a battle, and that supports the action. As a player, what am I supposed to be excited about getting to do in this world? And it's like the mechanics are there, the action is there, right? So in Violets of Amicus, this is handled pretty well, but I don't feel like we have a good handle on the fantasy of what is cool about being this guy in this situation, right? And they seem to have a reasonably fleshed out story, and even an economy of like all of this stuff about breaking weapons and stuff. So, because this really just does feel like a very generic RPG Maker type character, and we've put some purple on their head because they've got magic from the purple flowers. What's the appeal there? So let's have a look at the Kickstarter now, because that was one of the things that I wanted to look at. Right, 50k goal, 60k goal, made a tenth of it. I'm going to go through this and just react to it step by step. So if I come across as mean here, then bear in mind the developer said, I'm looking for brutal honesty. When you put trademarks over everything in a piece of text like this, it comes across as incredibly try-hard. This search I've got set up here is games within the same price range, so games that are trying to raise between $10,000 and $100,000 that have raised between 75 and 100%. So games in the same category that did better. And I'm pretty sure if we click on any of these, we're not going to get bombarded with loads of trademarks and stuff in the text. Yeah, nothing there. So it just looks incredibly try hard. We're really trying to build a brand with this IP to have these trademarks everywhere. You don't need to do it. Please don't do it. It makes me cringe. And if it makes me cringe, then it's going to make other people cringe. Marketing works best when people don't feel like they're being marketed to. And all of this stuff you do on here to make yourself feel professional is not hitting well with an audience. It feels like cosplay. It feels like you're really desperate to be taken serious. So you're front loading all of these trademarks and the name of your studio and stuff like that. Just tell me about the game. 2D semi-open world action adventure game inspired by the Legend of Zelda series. The phrase semi-open world also doesn't hit work for me. It feels like you're trying to have the best of both worlds. Take that out entirely. Just say it's a 2D action adventure game. Say it's a dungeon crawler. Some people really like open world games. But if you're putting open world on there as an appealing thing and then saying it's sort of like that, then you're only halfway appealing to that appeal, which just doesn't work. In the land of Valere, a young courier unexpectedly becomes a soldier and sets out to rid the countryside of the ferocious violets. With mysterious dungeons and roaming monsters, Asterix must hone his combat skills, gather weapons, discover special items, and unravel what is happening in the ancient gardens. With gameplay that mixes the classic feel of A Link to the Past with the modernity of Breath of the Wild, the Violets of Amicus will be easy to pick up and an exciting challenge to master. With snappy combat and a unique weapon system, the adventure will be both invigorating and rewarding. Again, it's front loading the unique weapon system, which I think is not something people care about initially when they're playing this type of game. I might be wrong. Story and characters. Asterix wants nothing more than to become a soldier, but his dream soon becomes a reality when violets unleash bloodshed at the yearly remembrance ceremony. This is tonally quite strange, because everything I can see about the game so far looks very sort of Saturday morning kids TV. It looks very soft and Nintendo. You know, the whole point of having monsters and flowers as monsters is so that we don't have to talk about human suffering and like bodily damage. As soon as you use the word bloodshed, you're pushing something up from being like a PG to a 15, because we're talking about like real violence here. Levels of violence that don't really match up with this aesthetic. He wakes up in hospital with the king standing over him and strange powers he absorbed from the violets. So that is why in the tutorial he had red hair and now he has some purple on his hair, because he got flower power. He got the power from the evil flowers. Yeah, someone in the chat pointed out that, you know, saying something is unique is not as good as describing how it's unique. So this is a difficult sell. If I'm thinking about in terms of appeal, being told that there's a unique weapon system doesn't work for me. Being told that there's loads of combat variety and I get to like pick how I approach combat, and I get expressive and tactical choices about which weapon I choose. That is what's exciting to me, because that's telling me what I as a player am going to get to do, rather than treating it like there's this feature in the game that's really good that you want to tell me about, right? You're not hooking into what the player is doing with that system, right? And that is really what you need to do to sell what's cool about the system. Again, this marketing is suffering from what we saw the demo suffer from, which is you have a unique system and you want to front load it and tell people about it and show people about it, and they just don't care. They don't care in the first half hour of your demo, and they don't care in the first paragraph of your Kickstarter campaign either. From minotaurs and reptiles to globs and violets, the violets of Amicus is filled with exciting enemies for Asterix to defeat on his journey. I don't think you should ever use words like exciting in marketing, because that puts a reader in a defensive mode. Like, as a reader, I read the word exciting and I think, well, I'll be the judge of that. You don't get to tell me that the thing is exciting. Tell me something about the enemies that is exciting, but don't tell me that they're exciting. Each enemy's difficulty is determined by their color, green being the easiest and black the hardest. That's really dull. If you said that the enemies in a game are bizarre is a word that intrigues me and excites me. If you like, let's say I'd never seen Dark Souls, and you describe the enemies in Dark Souls and you say, this game has bizarre enemies in it. That makes me excited, because exciting is like a second order effect of me, like whatever I'm personally excited by, right? If you said the enemies are sexy, I might find that exciting. But just telling me that something is exciting, it's like telling me that it's fun. Excitement and fun are second order effects of other things. Exciting is so generic that it doesn't really describe anything. I suppose that's kind of how I feel about this. So I would say, actually, what you're describing here, if you say there's minotaurs and reptiles, right, those are two enemy types that are just generic fantasy enemies. And I think, okay, yeah, whatever, that's all games have that. And then there's globs and violets. And I think, okay, a glob is going to be like a blob, and a violet, I don't know what that is. It's an evil flower of some description. What you're actually conveying here is that there will be some familiar fantasy enemies, and then there'll be some strange and bizarre enemies, right? So what we're doing here in terms of what's appealing to people potentially is that there is a good mix of fantasy tropes that will make us feel comfortable and stuff we're familiar with, and some more strange and bizarre stuff. And that is the actual thing that the game is offering that people might like. It's the striking a balance between having generic, you obviously wouldn't use the word generic in marketing copy, but you know, fantasy monsters you recognize and some you don't. That's the appeal here. They're not all exciting. That's kind of the point. You have some very generic enemies, and then you have some bizarre enemies. And that is the thing that I would try and convey in that. I'm not going to get into the weeds of like how you structure those sentences right now, but yeah. I think another thing that is really missing here is like, we do have a top level fantasy of what the character is doing and why, right? We're trying to save the king's son because they've been poisoned by violets. We've been a bit sort of indirect and unclear about that. The hero needs to save Valere, but we're not really sure. And then we kind of lose track of that as we go further down. It's like, where's the interstitial thing that defines why I'm going into dungeons? This particular character in the world is just not inherently appealing, right? What's the appeal there? You know, think of some fantasy heroes. So let's make a matrix of them. Let's go Link, and then who's the opposite of Link? Put Kratos over here. Let's make a whole framework for working out what's appealing about different characters. This is a character with personality. This is a blank slate avatar. And Link isn't fully a blank slate. He does have some sort of character, but we're reasonably free to interpret who he is and what he thinks about because he doesn't speak. And then Kratos is up here somewhere. I'm going to alienate half the audience now. I'm going to say Link is a twink and Kratos is a bear. That's our other axis. These are gay archetypes of like a guy that is more feminine and a guy that is more masculine. Other axes are available. I'm sort of joking a little bit with how I'm using these, but I also think they are somewhat, they do play in somewhat to like how we perceive heroes and sort of types of heroes. Cloud has a bit more of a backstory than than Link. So he's up here. This obviously is not a framework that anybody should use, but it's also the sort of thing that you do have to think about when it comes to creative direction. So a create your own character is going to be bang in the middle, right? I think with Violets of Amicus, we have a character that sits in the middle, but we also don't get to define anything about them. And that's going to be a problem because they talk, but they don't quite have enough personality to make you like them as a standalone character, right? They're not Geralt, who is, you know, a character where you don't have any control as a player over who this guy is or what his personality is. And he's probably sort of over here somewhere on the Bear Twink axis, which is a very serious narrative design axis to use for designing your protagonists. But this character is like, they don't fit very strongly into either of these archetypes, which is fine. You know, it's okay to have a reasonably androgynous character, but also we don't have control over who they are in the same way as V, so they're sort of a pseudo character because they have one motivation that they go on and on about. And if you're going to have a character that speaks and is like an actual character rather than an avatar down here, then they need to have more than one trait. You know, they need to love donuts or hate mustard or something like that, because otherwise you're sort of in the territory of, like, you know, Sonic the Hedgehog. I think we put Sonic the Hedgehog in the middle of the gender presentation spectrum. He's kind of at the same level where he has two personality traits, and that's okay because he is a character that is designed for children. The Sonic furries are going to come for me now. A character like Sonic the Hedgehog or Mario can be incredibly flat because they are intended for children. This is a game that is asking people on Kickstarter to support its creation. If your game has a character that speaks in, then they're going to want something closer to a fully fledged character with a full personality and backstory and stuff like that. Anything can be a twink or a bear, really. Karlach goes over there. Shadowheart is clearly a twink. This character feels very like they don't have anything stand out about them apart from the hair thing. If I were to take this more seriously, we've got like one axis that is character versus avatar, and then one axis that is visual presentation hook. You're making a character-driven game, right? So Violets of Amicus is a character-driven game. You don't have any control over who you are. You are always looking at this guy. All of the problems we talked about with the onboarding are very easy to fix. The problems with the fantasy and the character feel a bit more deep-rooted in not understanding why someone would play one of these games in the first place, right? The character isn't blank enough to be an avatar, but nothing special enough to be their own character, right? So they're sort of hovering around in the middle of this axis. If you're starting a game from scratch, you make a choice about what to do with your character. Are they a character who speaks and has a personality, or are they not? Pick a position and stick with it. Like you could probably build a flow chart here. When I'm making my game, I decide whether my character speaks, and if my character is going to speak, I need to be reasonably confident in my ability to write that so that it's compelling. If the character speaks, they need to have more than one motivational characteristic, right? Otherwise, you're making Sonic the Hedgehog for an audience of adults. And the audience for indie games is nearly always adults as well, right? And that's one of the problems with making nostalgia-based things when you're an indie game developer, is that people think they want a game that's exactly like a SNES game from 1994 or a Game Boy game from 1994 because they have fond memories of that. But their memories of that thing are from when they were a child, and they don't actually want something that's exactly like that. They want something that evokes that feeling but is still kind of palatable to an adult and someone with adult tastes. So playing as a small boy that just is constantly going, I want to be in the army, is not appealing to an adult. If you go down that route of having a player character that is an actual character versus an avatar, then this is sort of your checklist of like, okay, is my character going to speak in this game? Then they need to have more than one motivational characteristic in order to actually be a character. Otherwise, they're going to get irritating very, very quickly. I know that this might feel like we're going too deep on this one thing, but you have to think about, when you make a game and you put effort into these areas, do you need to just put 10% more effort into that area to make it pay off? Because if you're not going to put the effort into making a speaking character be appealing and be a character that as a player I actually want to sit and spend time with and hear what they have to say, then they may as well not speak, and it's probably better if they don't speak, which is the or link route. If you are going to spend time making the character speak, then you need to think of like, how do I make this character endearing to the player? And Durant, you made a good point. I'm going to screen grab that as well, because I think if the developer watches this back, they're going to find that very helpful. The character is a courier at the beginning, right? We have this in the trailer as well, where it's like this setup of the character's family have a trade of they are couriers. Imagine the perfect setup for this game if we were to keep all of these story points as being basically the same. How could we redesign that tutorial section so that it introduced all of this in an interesting way and onboarded us into the fantasy of this character? So if we started this game and we were on a courier mission, and then the courier mission got interrupted by combat, and then we learn the combat, and then the player character is like, oh, I don't want to be a courier. I want to stop things like this happening. I want to help the kingdom, That would be a much better lead into both the mechanics and presenting them in a context that doesn't feel like contrived as a tutorial, and like making us like this guy and kind of care about why he wants to be in the king's army, you know? Thank you all for joining today. I'll see you all again soon.